Welcome back to In My View. So far tonight, Catherine has argued against the politicisation of appointment to the Australian legal system. Corey has urged governments to stop when they're considering financial bailouts. And Sarah thinks the more we change our political ideology, the more we stay the same. Government and mainstream media members of the Fourth Estate have pushed a line that COVID-19 has been well handled in this country. Well, I beg to differ. And the plight of tens of thousands of Australians trapped overseas tells us a lot about the real performance of those who are in charge in government. How is it and why is it that Australia is one of the most difficult countries in the Western world to get into and out of at the current time? Firstly, we see stripped bare the lack of true cooperation with different state and territory quotas on weekly arrivals that make it uneconomic for airlines to operate flights. Secondly, despite having armies of public servants on full pay with time on their hands, it demonstrates government's constant failure to look ahead and properly develop a plan. Someone should have been given the job back in April to develop a plan for federal government-controlled quarantine at the international border to facilitate ongoing movements and to get people home. Thirdly, it demonstrates a lack of flexibility and innovation in their thinking. We have mining camps, defence bases, empty resorts and hotels that are close to major airports. They should have been used. Fourthly, government by media conference and spin rather than telling the truth and telling it straight. For some time, they sought to blame the airlines for not providing affordable fares to trapped Aussies. They then sicked the ACCC onto the airlines, when all the time it was government restrictions that were to blame. And the statement that trapped Australian families will be brought home by Christmas by the PM is probably not achievable. Finally and importantly, it shows how they really don't understand the true impact on economic activity in our recovery. For example, I know of a major aerospace company and the difficulties they have faced in getting specialist technicians in from overseas to work on certain aircraft. If the work's not done on these aircraft critical to our aviation industry, they won't fly, not at all. We need to end this farcical situation soon. Well, Catherine, what do you reckon about my little blast there?
Well, look, up to a point, agree with you, Campbell. But there are a lot of links in this chain, and I know a couple of people who've suffered grievously at the hands of this exclusion. A really dear friend had been in England with a sick relative, came back via Emirates, and the flights just kept getting cancelled, and we're in that period a couple of months back or 6 weeks ago when prohibitive airfares were being charged and entire international airliners had 10 people on them. So there's a choke point in the aviation industry that is well beyond the issue of quarantine or the Australian government's policy. The one thing I would say is that as an in-principle priority, I feel much more strongly about the reopening and the implementation of our constitution on internal borders as it is written as one indissoluble commonwealth than I do about the reopening of our external borders. Returning Australians, one thing, definitely. Let's get them home as quickly as possible. And you're quite right, there are resources on ADF bases and elsewhere where we can safely quarantine people. But the tears and gnashing of teeth amongst the foreign students, the business model of those universities, I am really unsympathetic about that, frankly, and I think a lot of Australians would feel that as well. That they, as far as they're concerned,
I actually agree with you in terms of the internal borders. That's axiomatic to me. But really, what I'm trying to say this evening is this is almost just a case study of, frankly, why. My personal view is that the governments actually haven't handled this well. It's just a particular slice of the action. And I think it's critically important to get those borders open in a controlled way, and yet government has been asleep at the wheel. It hasn't developed a plan. And, the critical choke point is actually quarantining coming into Australia, which means the airlines can't run the flights. But, Corey, what do you reckon? And particularly from a South Australian perspective, you had a Premier who wanted to bring in overseas students and soak up some of the quota that Australians wanting to return could have been using.
Yeah, Campbell, if you're looking for an ally tonight, mate, I'm sorry, you're not going to get it from me. I've been absolutely critical of how the governments around this country have handled COVID and stuff. But look, I think Australians overseas had plenty of warning that the borders were going to be closing and that they needed to come home all those months ago. I know people that did and others chose not to, and now they're bleeding and whining that they can't get back. I don't want to see us return, quite frankly, to the border policies that we used to have, where international students were coming in here, propping up our economy. I think we actually have to reconsider how we're going about managing migration to this country, managing people who want to come here as visitors, and making sure that we look after our national interest. And quite frankly, I think the federal government has actually done this pretty well. So I'm sorry, I'm not supporting you on this one tonight, notwithstanding it's not perfect.
I think you're conflating... I think you're conflating a whole range of other issues like migration. I'm talking about Australian families and people who actually were told by the federal government. They were told, and I've seen multiple interviews and seen the original advice where they were told to actually stay in place if they had jobs or contracts that to see out. And now they've lost their jobs and they need to get home and they can't. But Sarah, Sarah, you're going to be my ally on this whole thing this evening.
Campbell, I am going to be your ally on this evening. And
worried.
I agree. Yeah, that's right. Corey's like, please, you really don't want Sarah as an ally. Campbell, run now.
That's a cheap
shot. I do agree with you. And I have a lot of friends and family that work in Australian aviation. We all know, obviously, how terribly disrupted that sector's been. But, for instance, there have been people in Dubai that have lost their jobs, Australians that have been trying to come home. They've been going to the airport day after day after day, and they can't get on planes. And the reason that they can't get on planes is because of the cap here at border services, and particularly in Sydney. And I think it is time for that border cap to be lifted. I've been told again, obviously, you know, people in aviation have a vested interest, but they have said there's been no documented case of anyone contracting coronavirus while on board a flight, even a long-haul flight. You know, there's so many variables for the humidity, for instance. And so if you are then coming home and you are going into 14 days quarantine and obviously you're getting tested, you really aren't posing any threat. So I do think 6 months on, it is time to review the policy. I'm a little more forgiving than you as to the government's choices up to this moment. I think it was very hard to make these decisions. We were literally on the fly, if you'll forgive the pun, back in those early months. But now it's time, and as you say, we've got a big goal. I think it's 25,000 people stranded overseas, as I understand it. We've got to get them back by Christmas. And you know what? It will help the airlines' recovery. And I know that that is only one of many, many priorities. But again, you know, the people in the airlines are saying if you lift those caps, then, you know, I know Anthony Albanese, I believe, called for the Royal Australian Air Force to be brought in. Qantas are saying you don't need the Royal Australian Air Force. We've got the crews, we've got the planes. Let us go and bring people back home, and then they'll, you know, that's how we'll see our airlines recover as well.
Yeah, well, good luck,
what do you
Campbell.
think about these underemployed public servants, Corey, that are supposedly the border force people at our airports? What the heck have they been doing during this time? I mean, you know, they used to. Now, I think we normally have, but we have, I think, 44 million arrivals or arrivals departures a year.
Now you're trying to butter me up, Campbell. Because
what are they doing? What are they doing? Are they all on flexi time? Yeah.
Who knows, mate? What they've done is they've been sequestered and locked up in their offices, and like in Victoria, they've probably all this security's been outsourced to Indigenous organisations and people on WhatsApp and stuff. There is so much chaos related to this going on around the country, and I've got to tell you, Campbell,
that was my
you're
point.
Absolutely
Chaos.
right on this waste of public servants' time
Corey,
and money.
I'm going to tell you something. Having been in the job leading a state and also a city, I can smell BS and chaos in administration from a long, long way off. And this whole thing reeked. A national cabinet, which is a complete joke, state premiers who are cowards, poltroons, who are just playing a shabby political game, destroying our national economy, and a Prime Minister who won't stand up and give him a belt around the ears and use the powers that he actually has. I mean, I'm ending the evening on a high note. Someone shoot me down, please.
I'm in violent agreement about that one, mate.
I reckon we're all with you. We can smell it right around the country.